John Lewis is a brand that has storytelling at its heart. So if you talk to people who are either John Lewis customers themselves or their parents are, they will inevitably describe that in the form of a story. This is in secondary school, and I said I want to be a journalist, and basically the teacher said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically said I wouldn't bother. A big part of the jobs we do as comms professionals is ensuring that those around you, in particular senior leaders, are really comfortable that the team have got a plan, got an agreed approach that people are signed up to.
My guest for this episode is Chris Wynn. Chris began his career as a journalist, going on to become Editorial Director for Informa, a FTSE 100 business. He then moved to Ofcom, the communications regulator in the UK, working his way up through the ranks to become Director of Communications. He's now Director of Communications for the John Lewis Partnership, home to two of the UK's most loved brands, John Lewis and Waitrose, where he leads corporate and public affairs, brand communications, internal comms, and the Gazette, the partnership's in-house magazine. I first met Chris whilst he was at Ofcom and was really honoured when he asked me to speak for the top leaders at John Lewis about storytelling a couple of years ago. He is an expert in the field, and I'm delighted to have him on the show to share his insights on the importance of purpose and storytelling in communication. If you enjoy what you hear, please leave a review, like, comment and subscribe. It'd mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Chris, welcome to the show. My first question for you, in life, what is the most important thing that you've ever had to pitch for?
Gosh, what a big question to open. You didn't prepare me. That wasn't on the list. It's a difficult question, and one that I will answer in a slightly different way, if I may.
Go for it, yeah.
Which is actually, I think we're making important, critical pitches every day of our lives. I really do think, especially in working in communications, that everything is about presenting and ensuring that you're conveying your message successfully, with clarity and with conviction. And as a result of that, I mean, it almost becomes part of everyday life. And I think that's something that I've learned as well, that actually it's, especially when you're representing, as I do at the moment, two amazing brands, that you really want to talk about why they are so special, and also probably helping to demystify some things around them as well. So I think, life. I truly believe in your title of life. Life is a pitch, and I apply it every day.
Awesome. Oh, and that's real music to my ears. If you think about that kind of continuous stream of pitching, of conversations, of trying to plant ideas in people, and help the seed grow, as it were. As you look back on your career, and we'll delve into this as we go through the episode, but you've done loads of really interesting stuff. Are there any pitches that you kind of think, I'd love to have seen what had happened if I'd have gone down that route? Job interviews, requests for budget. Are there things that you think, that could have been really interesting? It would have been fun to have seen where that went.
Yeah, I think that you always do look back and think, could I have done that a bit differently or a bit better? What I would say is, probably in the last 5-10 years, I've learned a lot more that you should try and look forward and not backwards. And that's and you hear that a lot, but I really do think I probably used to spend far too much energy thinking about what you could do differently. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's critical to learn from what you do, and if you really want to develop that continuous improvement mindset, then you've got to be thinking about, well, that was good, but how could we do it better? But ultimately, I think it links to something that I think a lot about, which is perspective. And control what you can control. Don't sweat the small stuff, and just try and get things into context and perspective. Because that if you don't, that leads you to just think back and dwell on stuff and think, well, I could have done that differently. And just try and understand that, well, it's done. Let's move on. Let's look forward. Make the most of what you have and what you've got. But learn for the future. And if you don't learn for the future, then I don't think you can move forward. But and probably another slightly evasive answer as well, Dominic.
No, not at all. I think it's really interesting, especially in your world. You're constantly engaging, with the media, trying to tell the John Lewis story. And we've arranged to have this interview in the past and had to cut it short because something big came up, and it was really important that you were there. And at the same time, like, that's old news now. So it's fascinating how much you have to stay in the present, I think, and not dwell on what happened in the past. Of course, you want an eye on the future, but the more you're kind of in the moment and engaging with what's in front of you, I think probably the more effective you are. So you are currently the Director of Communications for the John Lewis Partnership. It's one of the most loved brands in the UK. You started your career as a journalist, but what's your story? Like, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, obviously, like many young kids, I wanted to be a footballer. But
were you any good?
No, I was rubbish. So I quickly put those ambitions to one side. I always remember from a very, very early age, I wanted to be a journalist, and probably from the age of about 10. And I was always deeply fascinated by the media, and particularly television. And it wasn't just that I used to be sat in front of a TV all day. It wasn't about that. It was just the whole concept of broadcasting and the media and newspapers and indeed radio. And I just decided from quite a young age that I wanted to be involved in that. So I think from 10 years old, I was thinking, I'd love to be a journalist. I remember one of my school teachers, you do the standard, go around the room, what do you want to be when you grow up? And this is in secondary school, and I said I want to be a journalist, and basically the teacher said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically said I wouldn't bother.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, indeed. But actually, that was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because it made me very, very determined to pursue this career.
Do you think it was don't bother because you won't be any good at it, or don't bother because it's
definitely.
not? Oh, really? Oh, that's even worse.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I don't know. I think probably like many boys of that particular age, probably not as focused at the academic side of life, but I managed to sort of get through my A-levels, get myself to university, and study media production. And because at that time I was thinking, I wasn't entirely sure which journalism I'd wanted to pursue. So it could have been print, it could have been radio journalism, and actually at the time I quite liked radio production. But I'd like to try to put in place the things that would position myself well. So I did like work experience at the local newspaper, and actually really enjoyed it. And I thought, I really do want to pursue this. So I studied media production and left for university, went home for 2 weeks, and moved to London.
Wow.
Didn't really let my feet stay in the place, same in home too long, and moved to pursue a career in London, which was, I mean, it was incredibly overwhelming and quite daunting for a kid from the East Midlands. Who I think I'm not even sure I'd actually been to London before, so it was. Actually, that's not surely true. I had been for a visit a few times, but to go and start a career, it was absolutely daunting. But I did love it.
Did people take you under their wing? Did you have kind of mentors at that stage of your career?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I did. I think what was probably the best possible start for working in London was I had a girlfriend at the time who lived down south in just outside London, and her mother was very, very gracious and letting me stay for a couple of months just until I found somewhere to live, which was a huge benefit. So I did. I had some fantastic mentors who I worked with. I went into trade journalism, and that probably wasn't where I thought I'd end up, but I absolutely loved trade journalism because it really allows you to become a specialist and really get to grips with an industry. And I was writing about TV and the media and this sort of emerging digital media sector, which was very much driven by new technology, the internet, broadband, and it was absolutely fascinating. And it's very interesting. I look now at where we've got to post the pandemic and hybrid working, which I think has enormous benefits. I'm sat at home on a Friday doing this, and I'll be plowing through all my admin. And I think it's great that we can we don't have to be in an office 5 days a week if we don't need to.
Yeah.
But I do fear for people who perhaps haven't got the balance quite right, because I learnt most of what I know just by being sat opposite someone and listening. And I really think we underestimate the importance of just observing and listening, and especially in journalism, but also in working in public relations and PR, because ultimately it's about people and it's about relationships and understanding how I mean it might sound very basic, but even understanding how you pick up a phone and speak to a complete stranger and try and get a story out of them, and the PR version of that is pick up a phone to a complete stranger and pitch a story to them.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you can read books on this, but I think the most important thing I always found was just listening, observing, and learning. And by osmosis, you just pick it up.
Yeah.
So I remember getting into journalism, and so lots of change. I was 21 years old. I was learning about the qualities of journalism, which is about attention to detail, writing, and just having really high standards. So the publication I worked for used to be owned by the Financial Times, so it had an incredible reputation. And people were paying significant. They'd pay £1,000 a year or so to subscribe to this magazine, and that's a lot of money. So the quality that people expect is extremely high, and you are trying to engage with the audience on their level. So therefore, you've got to know what you're talking about, and you've got to understand the sector deeply. And I loved that, and I think it was it sort of set me up to where I went next in my career.
So in terms of the practicalities of that. I talk a lot about storytelling and creating narrative. One of the things that strikes me about the world of journalism is that you've got to do that, but with a deadline. Like, you just can't sit there forever and muse about how to bring things into a coherent story. I'm sure there's times when that's available to you, but quite often it must be about cutting things down. How much column space have you got for this? How do you get the story down to its bare bones? Like, what were some of the kind of tools and techniques that you learned during that part of your career that you've brought with you into what you do now?
Yeah, I mean, I look back on it now and I think, God, that must have been really stressful. So I was I was the editor when I was about 25 years old.
Wow.
And I look back and I think I'm surprised that I was basically the one responsible for making sure quality was high, pages were full, good mix of stories, and as we used to say, it's never gone out blank. And we used to always make sure we had enough content. But it was very much about being organised, really thinking ahead. So I was on a weekly deadline, so you'd be basically putting an issue to bed and then thinking about what's next. There was not really much time to catch your breath. I mean, in terms of planning, I worked with some fantastic editors, contributing editors who helped me, and still to this day, I was working with some of the best writers I've ever worked with, and extremely talented, and just as journalism is all about, it's the ability to turn the complex into something simple, compelling, clear, and that whatever side of the fence you're working in communications, that's still critical to what I do today.
Yeah,
and also I love writing. Any chance I get, I will write, from a press release to a speech to a social media post. I think it's a really important craft, and one that you've never mastered. You're always learning. You can always improve. And if you actually, I think if you stop, you get rusty. So that'd be my advice. Keep writing.
It's fascinating. I think in the world of AI, and the media has changed so much. I'm sure if you look back to your 25-year-old self and imagine what you'd be doing in the same role right now, if that role even exists. But I feel, and I don't know whether you agree, that AI in terms of content and copy is actually like really dangerous, because it lowers the bar. Certainly, there's nothing that I'm seeing at the moment that I think, oh, that's fantastic. Like, I think it has its place in terms of, being your assistant and helping you streamline some of your work. But I don't believe it can write for you. I'd be interested to know what you think about that.
It's a very interesting debate, and one we're having internally at the moment. And I think I'm actually, probably my position on this is changing as you learn more, and also as AI improves. Because if you think about it, we're still really at the foothills
early doors,
of what this technology can do. I mean, about a year ago, somebody sent me a piece that had appeared, a news piece online from actually a large publisher that was AI generated, so generative AI, sent to me, and I was reading the piece thinking, actually, this is okay. And I was thinking, God, the robots are going to, take all our jobs. But there was, about halfway down, there's a paragraph, and I recognised the paragraph in it, and it was because I'd written it a few months previously. So, and it was pretty much word for word what I'd written. So I checked. And I was sort of I was quite relieved because I thought, well, someone's got to originate the content for AI to draw upon.
Yeah.
But in seriousness, I think it is getting better. I think it will have a role to play. I think the basic tasks, I think it will be transformative. I also think, as you say, it's only at this stage, it's only ever going to be a first draft, and everything needs a human eye on it. And I think that's where attention to detail and editing skills are going to be critical. But ultimately, if AI can improve productivity from creating what might be seen as a more manual task of creating I don't know, you might say, can you create me 5 LinkedIn posts in different tone of voice from this report, for example, drawing on the key highlights. But if we can use AI for tasks like that, I mean, my view is that frees up the human brain to focus on all those creative, innovative tasks that humans are so amazing at doing. So I see it as I don't think I'm not necessarily it's going to replace humans, but it will definitely free up time for us to do what we do best and actually do the more interesting work. So still trying to learn about it, but I'm really keen to see how as a communications team we can capitalize on it. And I know other teams are doing, other organizations, many organizations are already using it. So I think it'd probably be naive to think it's not going to have a seismic impact on communications.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to come back to this conversation in 5 or 10 years' time and see where we are.
I'll probably, a robot will probably replace me by that point. There'll be an empty chair. Yeah,
a hologram. So you moved then from journalism, like, what do they say? Poacher turned gamekeeper. Your next role was at Ofcom, which is the communications regulator. And I think you spent about 11 and a half years there working your way up the ranks to director of communications. Talk to me a little bit about that journey, because there'll be many people listening who are working within an organization. They're in not junior roles, but those kind of middle roles, and they have an ambition to progress. Like, how did you pitch your way from being one of the team to leading the team?
Yeah. So I was in journalism. I sort of reached. I was editorial director, so I'd probably reached my ceiling, and I was thinking about what was next. And I'd had a brilliant time at actually a very big global publisher and business intelligence company called Informa, and it was a great company to work for. But I was thinking about what's next, and I basically decided I was. There were two routes. I was either going to stay in journalism and perhaps go a bit more mainstream, perhaps lose some of that specialism. But actually, I thought I really didn't want to do that. And then one of my contacts, and contacts are really important, said there's a job as an analyst at the communications regulator. So it was a broadcast and media analyst, which was really well suited to me. And I applied, went through a competitive process, and I got the role. And it was fantastic because it really, really sort of taught me a lot from it. It was the importance of all those skills I'd built up from journalism. So crafting a narrative, importance of accuracy, drawing on data, all of those competencies. But for what was probably the most respected communications regulator in the world, and Ofcom had a fantastic reputation as this new converged regulator, which had the foresight to see that all these sectors in the communications world were converging. So it was called a converged regulator, and it was a fantastic time. There was some incredibly bright people, and I learned a lot. Really supportive team, and after a couple of years of doing, I actually worked on some quite big investigations, produced a lot of their data and reports. But after a couple of years, I was slightly getting itchy feet, and then I got asked to go and join the communications team. So that truly was poacher turned gamekeeper.
Yeah.
And because I'd actually missed the pace, so I was working to deadlines that were perhaps 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Right. Okay.
Which, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed. I enjoyed what I was doing, but I missed the pace of journalism, and moving into communications. You're definitely feeling that pace. So I did that for a few years and in various roles, and ended up as communications director, which was a huge privilege because, as I say, it's. I think if you think about what I've done, purpose in its broadest sense has always been a bit of a thread running through it. Whether it's journalism trying to, get to the bottom of what's happening, whether it's working for a public sector body trying to ultimately get good outcomes for the public, and then later moving to the partnership, which is probably the original purpose-led business.
Sorry to interrupt, but before we continue with the episode, I've got a favour to ask. I'm on a mission to get this podcast in the hands of as many people as possible. So if you found what you've heard so far valuable, please, please, please like, comment, rate and subscribe. These things make a huge difference to our reach. And if you're open to it, if you happen to know just one person, someone who, just like you, would benefit from listening to these conversations, then please share the podcast with them. Let's get on with it. Talk to me then a little bit about the John Lewis partnership and that kind of unique story and history that's behind the model. Where does that come from?
Yeah, the John Lewis partnership is quite a unique business. I think often misunderstood. So a lot of people will think, oh, I know a bit about the partnership. They have their annual bonus and things like that, and so some of that knowledge or baggage that people bring isn't always either correct or particularly helpful. But the partnership is the biggest employee-owned business in the country, one of the biggest in the world. So we are not owned by external shareholders. So any money we make stays within the business, either to invest in our growth or to reward our employees. We call our employees partners. So every one of us, with about 70,000 of us, are partners. And we own two really well-known brands in John Lewis and Waitrose. So we have the grocery business and the online and department stores business. And we have a written constitution that governs how we run, and which is a fascinating document. You can download it from the website if you've got a spare hour to read it. but it's basically our founder, Speeden Lewis. So John Lewis was the original founder of the John Lewis department stores, 160 years old this year.
Wow.
John Lewis, originally on Oxford Street, first store. And then his son basically thought it was very unfair that the owners made significantly more money than the people who worked there. So he worked tirelessly to hand over the business to partners. And the Constitution is governing how it's run to protect it and ensure it's sustainable in the future. So the written Constitution says we are required to make sufficient, not maximum profit. We just need to make enough money to do good for our communities, for our people, our partners, our suppliers, and our customers. And I just think in the world we live in today, that is absolutely, for me, the right way of doing business. And I think people often look at the model as, and what it used to be held up as a virtue of what good business should look like. I think we've had a tough couple of years, but we're now turning a corner, and I do think it is an incredible model. And the fact that the money we do make doesn't go to external shareholders; it goes to the people the partners in our business who work incredibly hard. Then I just think that is an amazing thing.
It is. It must have been incredibly radical 160 years ago. I mean, the fellow industrialists must have just thought they were absolutely mad for handing away all of the profit.
Well, yeah, I mean, that didn't happen until many years later.
Okay.
So, so that was less than 100 years ago.
Okay.
But ultimately, it was seen as a radical idea, and at the time, the founder, Speed and Lewis, so John Lewis's son, he set up the partnership model as a sort of counter to communism. And the logic behind it is, if you created this family within your business, then you could provide for them. So the partnership introduced healthcare before the NHS was even born. It had accommodation above the shops for particularly women, so they didn't have to travel home late at night on their own. And I mean, all of these things were just way ahead of their time, which is why we often look back to our past to think about and reinvent what is the future of the business. So, for example, we're now looking to build rental homes next to or above our Waitrose shops, which will be of the sort of next generation of our business to ensure we're sustainable in the future for the next 100 years. Because as a partnership, we don't. I mean, the benefit of not having shareholders is we do get to keep the rewards internally, but the downside is we can't tap up external shareholders
funding.
Equity. So we have to ensure that we've got a strong balance sheet, the business is sustainable, and we're thinking about the long term, and having a sort of balanced portfolio, a family of complementary businesses is really important.
You've mentioned purpose a couple of times in the conversation, and the John Lewis purpose is working in partnership for a happier world. How did that evolve? Because obviously that wasn't the original purpose of the organisation. So how has that evolved, and how important do you think it is to the success of the organisation and the people that work within it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So a few years ago, we embarked on a piece of work to refresh our purpose. So the purpose we'd had for many years. People connect us with a better way of doing business. But our found, it's called Principle One. We had a number of principles. Principle One was around ultimately it was around making the world a bit happier, but also by running an efficient business. So it didn't sound very modern. So we went through a process which was incredibly organic, where we had partners in the business come together to contribute. We held focus groups, and it wasn't just a group of external consultants saying, "Here's your new purpose." It was entirely organic and developed right across the business, and people had a chance to contribute. And that was really important, because people one of the unique things about the business is we run it on democratic lines. So we have the partnership council, where we have 50 something councillors who are elected. They are regional constituents across the country, and it's very much like Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
And they are one of our governing authorities. So the employee voice or partner voice is an incredibly important part of the model, and it's genuine as well. It's not just we don't pay lip service to it. That doesn't mean we don't have to make difficult decisions that people disagree with.
Yeah.
But we are consultative. Some people say it slows us down, but actually I do think people realise in the environment we're working in at the moment, we have to act quickly and move fast. So this was developed, and it was around this theme of happier, acknowledging that this is excuse the phrase journey, but because it's a bit overused at the moment, but it's an ongoing journey to happier, because being happy is the end state, and I think it might be unattainable for many, but making the world, our business, a bit happier every day is something really important to aspire to. And I don't think many businesses could have a purpose like ours, because I think we truly believe it. We truly live up to it. We're not perfect, don't get me wrong, and we get things wrong, but we do try our best, and we do try and stick to our purpose. And purpose is a long-term ambition, and there's bumps along the road, but it's definitely worth striving towards.
Yeah, I mean, I had the privilege of coming in and working with some of your senior leaders on the idea of happier and how they develop their own connection and story surrounding it, and I was really struck by how how organic and truthful that connection was. Quite often with vision and values, there's something that gets stuck on the meeting room wall or something like that, and actually it kind of really lived and breathed. There were so many tangible examples from people about what this meant for them and for their teams and for the customers that they served. When you think about the purpose, how does it shape the kind of pitch and proposition to customers? I mean, we'll hopefully get a little bit of a chance later on to talk about the Christmas ads and all of those great things that you do. But how do you ensure that it's there in the through line? When you're sourcing products, or you're deciding on where to open a new location or do something like rental housing. How does it come into the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's really ingrained in how we work day to day. So if I or my colleagues in the business want to take a paper to the executive team to say they're pursuing a piece of work or a project, I mean, they will have to answer, how does this help fulfill our purpose? Mm-hmm. So it really is embedded into the business. As I said, it's not always easy to say everything we ever do fulfills our purpose. But if the ultimate ambition is, we talk about happier people, happier business, happier world, and actually there are definitely tensions between those.
Yeah,
and they're you might be in a period of focusing on one more than the other, and that might be true. I'm sure some of our partners internally would argue that that's the case at the moment, but it doesn't mean you'd want to give up on it.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's a long-term ambition. The business has had a challenging couple of years, but it's been challenging in terms of making difficult decisions, which is in service of long-term aim of fulfilling our purpose and creating a successful partnership, and I say partnership as in a business that continues to be owned by its employees for the long term, and that's that's not always a given. So I think we talk a lot about the why internally, and we try to talk about why we're making changes or why we're doing stuff that people might consider difficult or not very partnership. But it is all in service of creating a sustainable employee-owned business for the long term in what's a really competitive market.
Yeah.
So we do talk a lot about purpose. I actually think there's been I do think in the outside world, a lot of this stuff has been brought into the culture wars, which is a bit of a shame, because if you're a business that just wants to do the right thing, to be dragged into that, whether it's accused of being woke or not, I think that's quite sad. But it's the world we live in at the moment. But that shouldn't stop us as a business trying to do the right thing, trying to put back to our communities, make sure, as you say, we're focused on things like sustainability. We're really focused on our supply chains, making sure our supply chains, people in supply chains, are paid fairly and looked after. So we make no apology for that, because it's really important, and it's what our customers expect. Our customers expect us to do the hard work for them. So when they come into a Waitrose branch, they know that if they're looking around the fresh meat counter, that our standards are higher animal welfare, for example, and that's something we will not compromise on, because that's what we're known for example.
It's fascinating, that whole kind of culture wars piece. It almost made me chuckle, because I'm kind of thinking, 160 years of woke. It's probably a good thing for a t-shirt.
That's a good idea, actually.
You can steal that. So from a comms perspective, like you're always pitching, like internally, externally, trying to define a narrative to a certain extent, and also share a narrative. You've been doing this across your career for over 20 years. So what are the biggest lessons that you've learned? Like, if people are listening to this, have you got any tips or tricks for people to think about how they structure their thinking, or how to approach getting their message to land?
I think a few things I'd highlight. First of all, it's never job done. And I mean that on two levels. So you might think, I've crafted my perfect narrative, and that's great, and it's there, but actually it's never done. The world is changing so rapidly that you have to revisit, refine, repeat, ensure everyone's still aligned around what this narrative is, of whether, and it may be about what is the business trying to achieve, what do we stand for. So it's never job done. The other thing I would say is, linked to that, is you can always look to improve as well. And it plays a point I made a bit earlier about, we're always learning, we're always practicing our craft. And I think to not think things can be improved upon is a little bit naive. And I also really believe in, I think having people contribute is really important. I don't mean sort of editing by committee, if you're trying to shape a story, because I think you can go too far and you have too many people involved, and you soon find it's something's not in any particular tone of voice or a single voice. But I do think appreciating that people come to things with their own perspective, their own ideas that can ultimately improve the end product. Having that open-mindedness is incredibly important. I also think whenever you're doing any writing, whether that's a speech, a narrative, a press release. Always come back to it. Always close it. Come back to it the next day, and you will. I guarantee you'll spot things that you can improve, words you can take out, So I rarely write in one sitting and then fire it off. It's come back to it, and you can improve it, definitely.
That's fascinating. In terms of the more kind of quick fire stuff, when you're in not necessarily crisis comms mode, but when there are hot topics and journalists are contacting you and saying we'd like your response to this or your thoughts on that. Do you still get a sense of kind of nervousness? Do you ever, or that sense that you're under pressure? Like, how do you manage that for yourself? Because it must be a high pressure world to work in.
I guess it is. I think first I'd say I've got an incredible team, a really, really talented team, and they make me look good a lot of the time. In fact, I've always worked with really talented people. I've been very, very fortunate that it's a cliche, isn't it? But if you surround yourself with talent and good people, I do have quite a lot of views on pressure and anxiety. You mentioned anxiety, and I think anxiety is an interesting one because I think in the jobs, the kind of job I do and other comms professionals, if you allow that anxiety and that pressure and that stress to be visible, then I think that can be quite damaging. I really feel anxiety breeds anxiety, amongst others.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't always get this. I think probably 10 years ago, something like that, it was very, very visible when I was stressed, and I did a lot of work, a lot of coaching. And I also I qualified as a coach as well, which I think helped massively as well. To just comes back to perspective, actually. And even though you might be the slightly you might be panicking a bit inside, but actually the important thing is to stay calm, measured on the outside, because that's what gives people around you reassurance.
Yeah.
If you're running around the office screaming, then
flapping,
that's not going to give people any confidence in how a situation is being handled. So yeah, it's really important. You might be panicking inside. You might be the swan that's swimming furiously underwater but graceful on the surface, and that's okay. That is okay, because I wouldn't swap my level of sort of anxiety and worry for anything, because that is what keeps comms professionals sharp and alert and aware of risk. People often say good comms people, they've got that ability to look around corners, see around the corners, and that's true. And it's I'm not sure how much of that you can learn necessarily, but it's a really important skill to be able to calibrate and understand risk, and therefore share what level of risk a situation is placing on a team or a business or your particular circumstances. So it's I wouldn't swap my level of worry for anything.
I think it's
a common superpower, I think.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that it's really about using the energy of the moment rather than allowing the energy of the moment to use you. You talk about that kind of sharpness and focus. People often ask me when I'm speaking to a big audience, do I get nervous? And it's like, well, I have a physiological response to being in that space, but I can either choose to kind of call it nerves, or I can choose to say this is me feeling really alive in this moment, and wanting to serve the people that I'm talking to or with. And it sounds like it's the same in your environment, that you can kind of take that and it becomes your superpower rather than something that kind of unpicks you and leaves you vulnerable.
I think that's right, and it's about controlling it. Once you get it's that surge of adrenaline when you're dealing with a particular situation. It's about controlling it and being clear-headed. You've really got to clear your head and think, right, what are we going to do? As I said, my team are fantastic and very, very well prepared. It's if we know there's a situation, I think 9 times out of 10 we're prepared for a version of it. So I do think that's incredibly important. And it gives reassurance to those people around you. I think a big part of the jobs we do as comms professionals is ensuring that those around you, in particular senior leaders, are really comfortable that the team have got a plan.
Yeah.
They've got an agreed approach that people are signed up to, because managing up is a really important part of the job as well.
Absolutely.
And we've got to have this no surprises approach.
Yeah. Chris, I can't have you on the podcast and not talk about the John Lewis Christmas advert. So you're going to have to indulge me for a second. And I know that you're not directly involved, but I think story is so important, and storytelling is so important. And it strikes me that there, to a certain extent, there is one annual story that is put out there that has quite a major impact, I would imagine, on the success of the business in that Christmas period. So what goes into the crafting of that narrative and bringing that story to life? And I imagine we're now in August. It's probably done and dusted almost, and you're onto the next one. But what's the process?
I think the John Lewis has an incredibly talented team, very creative team, who work with our advertising agency, Saatchi & Saatchi. Previously, for a long period, it was an agency called Adam and Eve. So it's a real partnership with the agency. First of all, as you say, it starts in January. As soon as Christmas is done, it's on to the next one. It is an important moment. I think clearly I'm not going to tell you anything about it.
Of course, I wouldn't expect you to.
But it's also, so it's really important for the brand. It really defines John Lewis, and I think everyone associates the brand with a cute Christmas ad that is really at its heart, as you say, it's an emotional storytelling. It's an emotional storytelling over 30 seconds. It's synonymous with the John Lewis brand. All I can say is you'll have to watch this space for this year's, but it will be no less amazing and brilliant, I'm sure. It's I think it really, that sort of skill and ability to tell an emotional story, and obviously lots of companies attempt this as well, and many with huge success. So it's not just us, but it has been a format that's been emulated over the years without a doubt. But it's I think people love it. I think it's brilliant for our partners internally as well. They love the moment. It feels special. It really it feels like it fires the starting gun on Christmas and what's a really important trading period for us.
Do you have like internal screenings of it? Do people get to see it? Do partners get to see it before it goes out to the public, or is it just a big surprise for everyone?
No, there is. We do show it internally. There's not a massive gap between it going out externally, just because of just trying to manage it tightly. But absolutely, they get to see it. So
that must be a brilliant moment, I'd imagine, a kind of a moment of celebration. I think, storytelling has such a strong place in motivating people, whether that's motivating people to do their best work or motivating buying decisions. We're so rightly easily swayed by a fabulous story, and I think John Lewis did it so well.
I think that's right. And John Lewis it's not just around the Christmas ad. John Lewis is a brand that has storytelling at its heart. So if you talk to people who are either John Lewis customers themselves or their parents are, they will inevitably describe that in the form of a story about when they went to buy a cot or a buggy for their first child. Then that takes them back to where they were living at the time, the birth of their child, and I just think that's something so special about the brand that you don't often see with other UK brands like that. It is something really, really special and unique.
I think, and I genuinely believe it all comes back to that clear purpose and that through line that you've got through the history of the brand, which is just so powerful. Chris, I could continue this conversation all day, but I'm going to wrap things up. It's been fantastic to talk to you. I've got one final question. If you could go back and give that 10-year-old boy that had this dream of becoming a journalist one piece of advice, what would it be?
Probably just crack on. But actually, the thing I think it'd be around be confident. Actually, because that's confidence is probably something that's come to me a bit later in life. But be confident, back yourself, and if you do that, you can achieve what you want to.
Brilliant advice. Chris, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalised report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.